The twin suns were setting over the red hills of Altherian Prime, painting the sky in shades of gold and blood. Humans and aliens sat together on stone benches around the central plaza, enjoying music, strange glowing drinks, and floating lights that danced in the air like fireflies. It was the time of the Unity Festival, a day when all species celebrated peace on the colony. Jack sat quietly near a small fountain, watching the alien guests with wide eyes. He was a human botanist, simple, curious, and not very special in anyone's eyes, but his heart beat faster when Zira entered the plaza. She was tall, graceful, and glowing slightly with the soft blue aura of her race, the Zalari. Everyone looked at her, but she didn't seem to care. She laughed as she walked, spoke with elegance, and carried herself like a queen. Jack had seen her before, many times, but only from far away. Tonight, for the first time, she walked right up to the fountain where he sat. He stood quickly, not sure what to say, his mouth dry. Zira tilted her head, amused. "You're the human who grows strange flowers, aren't you?" she asked. Jack nodded. "Yes, I study plant life, native and alien." Someone behind Zira laughed. "Careful, Zira. He might try to charm you with weeds." She smirked, then turned to Jack with playful eyes. "Tell me, human, have you ever heard of the crimson soul bloom?" The crowd suddenly grew quiet, curious. Jack blinked, surprised. "That's a myth," he said softly. "They say it grows only once every 1,000 years, and only if someone's heart is truly pure." Zira grinned. "Exactly, which means you'll never find it." Another Zalari male joked. "If anyone ever brings you that flower, you'd have to marry them." Zira rolled her eyes. "Fine," she said loudly. "If anyone, even this human, brings me the crimson soul bloom, I'll marry him." The whole plaza burst into laughter. Jack's cheeks turned red, but he didn't laugh. He looked at her, and something flickered in his eyes, determination. Zira saw it and hesitated, just for a second. Then she turned away, laughing again. "Don't take jokes so seriously, Flower Boy," she said, and walked off with her friends. But Jack didn't move. He sat back down, silent, while the others moved on. Inside, a fire had started. Slow and steady. Later that night, he packed his old explorer's bag with supplies, seeds, maps, scanners, and a single photo of the flower from an ancient alien book. He stood at the edge of the jungle gates the next morning, facing the wild and dangerous Sector 9. Very few returned from that place, and those who did never went back. Jack left a message with the colony guard, addressed to Zira. It said only 5 words: "Watch me find your flower." When Zira read it the next day, she stared at it for a long time. No one had ever taken her words seriously before. No one had ever challenged her like that. She tried to laugh it off, but her heart felt tight. "Foolish human," she whispered. But her voice was too soft, too unsure. Meanwhile, deep in Sector 9, Jack faced his first trial. A giant vine snapped at his leg as he walked through thick red fog. He dodged it, heart pounding, breath shaking, but he smiled. Because the journey had begun. He didn't care about the danger, the heat, or the beasts waiting in the dark. All he could see was her, standing under the moonlight, laughing, daring him. He whispered to himself, "You said it as a joke, but I'm going to make it real." Somewhere in the jungle, something ancient opened its glowing eyes. The crimson soul bloom was waiting, but it would not bloom for just anyone. Only for the one who would risk everything. Only for the one whose heart burned brighter than the jungle's fire. And Jack, quiet, unknown, and human, was walking straight toward it, not for fame, not for riches, but because a girl had laughed at him, and his heart had answered with a promise that could change 2 lives forever. The sky over Altherian Prime turned dark as thick clouds gathered, hiding both suns and casting the world in a strange gray light. Jack stood at the border of the jungle, alone, his backpack full, his scanner blinking weakly in the morning mist. Behind him was safety, familiar soil, warm buildings, and people who laughed at his plan. In front of him was Sector 9, a place where maps faded and technology often failed. No one guided him, no one wished him luck, and no one expected him to return, but Jack stepped forward anyway. With each step, the light behind him faded, and the air grew heavier. Branches curled like claws above his head, strange plants pulsed with light, and the wind whispered in a language he couldn't understand. He remembered an old legend from a book. The soul bloom only grows where no footsteps remain. That meant he had to go where no one else dared. Back at the colony, Zira walked along the edge of a tall tower, looking down at the jungle through a glass floor. She hadn't told anyone, but she'd taken Jack's message and kept it in her pocket. She unfolded it again, reading the 5 words. They made her feel something she couldn't name, something she wasn't used to. A human had accepted a joke as a challenge, and now he was risking his life for it. Part of her wanted to scoff, but another part whispered, what if he actually finds it? She accessed her private drone system and sent a small scout unit into Sector 9. Tracking signs of movement, Jack was not completely alone anymore. Inside the jungle, time moved differently. Morning never fully came, and night never truly left Jack. Crossed rivers that glowed in the dark, climbed hills covered in thorny moss, and avoided beasts with too many eyes. One night, he camped under a tree shaped like a giant hand, its branches curling around him like fingers. He held the picture of the crimson soul bloom close, staring at it under a dim light. A red flower with glowing veins, petals sharp like glass, and a soft center that looked almost alive. The picture was all he had to guide him. He didn't know the scent, the exact shape, or even if it still existed, but in his heart, something whispered, keep going. A week passed, and Jack began to lose weight. His clothes torn by branches and his skin marked by scratches. But he smiled through it all, because each step deeper made him feel closer. On the 8th day, the jungle changed. The air grew colder, and the trees bent away from a narrow path that wasn't on his map. It looked wrong, unnatural, like the forest itself wanted to hide it. Jack followed it anyway. He walked for hours until he reached a clearing filled with silence. At the center was a stone statue half buried, broken, and covered in moss. It showed a creature holding something in its hands, a flower, glowing even in the stone. Jack stepped closer, heart racing, and brushed away the moss. Symbols revealed themselves, old and forgotten, but one word shone in red beneath it, soul. Suddenly, the ground trembled, and a sharp whisper filled the air. Not from any mouth, but from the earth itself. You are not the first, the voice said, low and cold. Jack froze, backing away slowly, his eyes searching the trees. Then a shape appeared behind the statue, a creature tall and thin, with no face but eyes like silver flames. It didn't attack, didn't move, only watched. Jack took a shaky breath. I'm looking for the crimson soul bloom, he said quietly. The creature tilted its head, as if amused. Then you must face the trial of heart, it replied. Jack didn't understand, but he nodded anyway. The ground beneath him opened, and he fell into darkness. Back at the colony, Zira gasped as her drone signal blinked and vanished. Something had happened, and the drone was gone. Her heart thudded in her chest, louder than she wanted to admit. She stared at the last image it had captured, a stone statue holding a flower, and Jack standing before it. The image burned into her mind, and for the first time, she whispered his name. Jack, she said softly, not mocking, not playful, just afraid. In the blackness below the earth, Jack hit the ground hard, rolling into a tunnel lit by red crystals. A new path had opened, one no map had ever shown. He got to his feet slowly, his legs shaking, his spirit burning. Somewhere ahead, the flower waited, and something else too, something that would test more than just his body. It would test his soul. And he had already taken the first step, not for fame, not for pride, but because someone had laughed. And now he had to turn that laugh into silence, or something far more powerful, something that could only bloom in the heart, just like the flower he now chased through the forbidden wilds. The red crystals lit the tunnel like blood under glass. Jack walked slowly, each step echoing like a drumbeat inside a forgotten world. The air was warm but dry, like something had not breathed here for hundreds of years. His scanner blinked once, then died in his hand. No signal, no map, no time. Only the soft hum of something ancient, pulsing in the walls. He passed strange carvings on the stone shapes that looked like flowers. Hearts, stars, and eyes. They seemed to move when he wasn't looking. At the end of the tunnel stood a door, not made of metal or stone, but of woven roots. It opened without a sound when he stepped near. Inside was a chamber, round and glowing red, and in the center was a floating orb, surrounded by sharp thorns hanging in the air like blades. As soon as Jack stepped in, the door sealed behind him. A voice filled the room, not from a speaker, but from the roots themselves. "You seek the crimson soul bloom," it said, slow and deep. Jack nodded, his voice steady. "Yes." The thorns turned slowly, as if watching him. "Then answer this. What do you offer in return?" Jack paused, confused. I didn't come to take it for money or power," he said. "I came because someone laughed and said it was impossible." The air shimmered, and the voice became colder. "You come for pride, then?" "No," Jack whispered. "I come because—" Her voice stayed with me. The roots around him moved, circling his body like snakes. The orb floated lower, glowing brighter. "Then face the trial," the voice said, without warning. One of the thorns flew toward him. Jack ducked barely in time. As it sliced through the air with a hiss, another came, and another, testing his reaction. His fear, his choice to stay. He ran to the side, using his bag as a shield. But the thorns moved like they had minds of their own. Then they stopped, hanging. Still waiting. The voice returned, softer this time. "You cannot dodge truth forever." A thorn floated forward, slowly, aiming for his chest. Jack stood still, his heart pounding. He didn't move, didn't run. "I'm not afraid," he said, even though he was. The thorn pierced his shirt but didn't wound him. Instead, it glowed and then shattered like glass. The others followed, breaking apart one by one, as if they had seen something they respected. The orb rose again, revealing a path behind it, a new tunnel, filled with soft red light and the smell of blooming petals. Jack walked forward, his hands shaking but his eyes sharp. Each step felt heavier than the last, not from pain but from the weight of something important. Back at the colony, Zira sat alone in her room, the drone footage looping on her screen. She tried to focus on her duties, but nothing worked. The more time passed, the more her thoughts returned to that boy, walking into death with nothing but a flower in his heart. She didn't understand him, and that made her feel strange, annoyed, curious, and something more dangerous, worried. No one had ever made her feel like this, not even her own kind. She tried to laugh at herself, but the sound didn't come. Instead, she found herself tracing the symbol of the flower on her datapad. "Why are you still in my mind, human?" she whispered. Jack entered the second chamber, where the light was softer and warmer. Like sunrise, there were no more thorns, just silence. In the center was a small pool of glowing red water, and at the edge of it stood a stone pillar. On the pillar lay a single petal, bright and alive, but not yet a flower. Jack reached out, but before he could touch it, a voice echoed once more. "Why do you think you deserve it?" Jack dropped his hand slowly, breathing in and out. "I don't know if I do," he said. "I'm just a human, and I don't even understand why this flower exists. But I believe something real is waiting for me at the end of this path." He continued, "Something that can only bloom when someone chooses to believe." The chamber went silent, then the petal lifted into the air and vanished. From the water, a new stem began to grow, slow and glowing. A flower started to form. Not fully bloomed yet, but alive. It pulsed with Jack's heartbeat, reacting to him. He knelt by the water, eyes wide, breath held. He hadn't found the flower, he had awakened it. And now the path ahead was clear. This was only the beginning. The crimson soul bloom wasn't a treasure to find. It was a bond to earn, and somewhere far above the jungle, Zira stood in her tower, staring at the same horizon, feeling a tug in her chest she couldn't explain. She didn't know that something ancient had just chosen him, and soon it would force her to choose too. The tunnel behind him faded as the wall softened and melted into vines that breathed like they were alive. Jack walked forward, not guided by light or sound, but by a feeling in his chest. It was warm, steady, and stronger than fear. The path curved downward until it opened into a valley hidden deep inside the jungle, untouched by time or map. The sky above was not the real sky. It was glassy and red like it had been painted by memory. There were no birds, no wind, no noise, just silence, and the soft glow of flowers spread across the land like stars on velvet. Jack stepped carefully between them, trying not to disturb the beauty. Each flower was red, but none looked like the crimson soul bloom he had seen in the ancient book. They were close, but not quite right. Their petals didn't glow the same way. Their scent was wrong, too sharp or too sweet. He knelt and examined each one, checking the patterns in the veins, the heat from the petals, the rhythm of their growth. Nothing matched. He moved from one patch to another, his heart beginning to beat faster, not with joy, but with doubt. What if this was the end, and the real bloom wasn't here at all? What if the flower had tested him, and he had failed? He sat on a flat rock, shoulders heavy, lips dry. He stared out across the glowing valley, so silent it felt like the world was holding its breath. And then he heard it, his name, whispered softly from behind, carried not on wind, but through the roots. Jack turned slowly, unsure if the sound was in his head. There, hidden behind a curtain of thick glowing vines, something pulsed with red light. He stepped closer, pushing the vines apart, and what he saw made him stop breathing. For a moment, one flower, growing alone on a small floating platform of stone, hovered above a pool of still water. Its petals were closed, but even in that state, it glowed with quiet power. Jack's chest tightened. It wasn't just beautiful, it felt alive in a way no plant ever had, like it was sleeping, waiting, watching. He reached out his hand, but something made him stop. A low hum filled the air, not threatening, but ancient. A final voice spoke, softer than before. The soul bloom sees not your body, but your heart. Jack lowered his hand, knelt before the flower, and placed the picture from his book gently at the base of the stone. I didn't come here to take you, he said quietly. I came because someone joked that no one would ever find you. But I saw something in her eyes, a flicker of truth behind the laugh. He took a deep breath. And now, I'm here. The flower stayed still, closed and quiet. He waited, heart pounding, not daring to move. Then the petals trembled, one by one. They opened slowly, light spilling out like liquid fire. The flower bloomed, glowing brighter than anything Jack had ever seen. It wasn't just a plant, it was a living memory, a secret of the world. And it had just accepted him. The stone beneath it shifted downward, floating toward Jack. He held out both hands and caught the flower gently, surprised that it was warm. To the touch, like it had a pulse. The petals wrapped slightly around his fingers, not closing, just holding on, as he stood. The valley around him began to fade. The sky darkened. The glow of the other flowers dimmed. The trial was over, and the flower had chosen him, back in the colony. Zira sat in the garden alone, her communicator silent. For 2 days, no signal had returned, no news, no sight of the foolish human with his foolish dream. She told herself he was probably gone, swallowed by the jungle like the others before him. But when she closed her eyes, she saw him walking bruised, dirty, and still smiling. Something deep in her chest refused to let go of that image. A soft chime blinked on her screen. One drone had returned, broken, barely flying, but still holding a single image. Zira tapped it open, and her eyes widened. There was Jack, standing in a field of red, holding a flower so bright that the camera blurred around it. She dropped her drink, her hand trembling. It wasn't possible. But the truth was right there in front of her. the crimson soul bloom real, alive, and resting in the hands of the one person no one had believed in. She stared at his face in the photo, dust-covered, tired, but smiling like a man who had done the impossible. For a moment, Zira didn't know if she wanted to scream, cry, or laugh. She only knew one thing: he was coming back, and when he did, nothing would ever be the same. Not for her, not for him, not for anyone who believed legends were just stories. Because now the joke had become real, and it had bloomed. The colony gates opened slowly as the dust from the jungle rolled in like a low fog. Guards stood in silence, their scanners blinking as a single figure appeared through the haze. He limped, clothes torn, face scratched, and backpack half burned, but in his hands, wrapped in a cloth glowing with gentle red light, he carried something that didn't belong to this world. Jack had returned. Word spread fast, running through the colony like fire on dry leaves. Children ran to windows, aliens paused mid-task, and the older council members stared with wide eyes. No one believed it until they saw it with their own eyes. Crimson Soul Bloom was real, and Jack, the quiet human botanist, was holding it like a gift from the stars. Zira was in her quarters when the message came. "He's back," said her assistant, not hiding the shock in her voice. "And he brought the flower." Zira froze mid-step, her hand gripping the edge of the table. She had told herself it was impossible, had even laughed about it just a day ago, but now she couldn't move, her heart thudding so loud it drowned out her thoughts. She walked slowly to the main platform, where the crowd had already formed. Jack stood at the center, silent, exhausted, and holding the glowing flower in both hands like it was sacred. The council members circled him, whispering to each other, unsure what law could cover something this unbelievable. Then Zira stepped forward, her expression unreadable. Jack looked up and met her eyes, and for a long moment, no one spoke. The wind brushed across the plaza, lifting a strand of Zira's hair and sending a ripple through the flower's petals. Jack stepped forward, unwrapping the cloth slowly, revealing the bloom in full, its red glow reflected in her eyes as she stared at it, not with mockery, not with pride, but with something softer, something closer to wonder. He held it out to her without saying a word. Zira didn't reach for it right away. Instead, she looked at him, really looked at the cuts, the dirt, the way he stood even though his legs shook. "You actually did it," she whispered, not to him, but to herself. Jack gave a tired smile. "You dared me," he said, and I listened. Someone in the crowd chuckled awkwardly, trying to break the silence, but it didn't work. The moment was too heavy, too real. Zira slowly reached out and touched one of the petals. It pulsed under her fingers, warm, soft, alive. The glow spread to her hand, like the flower was recognizing her. Gasps came from the crowd, and a few backed away. Then, as if awakened, the flower released a gentle wave of red light that passed through the plaza like a breeze. For a second, everyone saw something: memories, emotions, tiny flickers of truth from their own hearts. Then it faded, and the flower went still again. Zira pulled her hand back slowly, as if unsure of what she had just felt. Her eyes met Jack's again, and now they held no pride, no teasing, only confusion and a growing flame she couldn't hide. "This wasn't supposed to happen," she said quietly. Jack nodded. "I know." She looked down at the flower, then back at him. "I joked," she whispered, almost as if confessing. "I didn't mean it, not really." Jack shrugged slightly. "I didn't care," he said. "I believed anyway." A silence followed, long, awkward, powerful. The crowd watched, waiting for someone to say something, but no one knew what the rules were now. One of the council members stepped forward, old and wrinkled, his voice shaking. "The crimson soul bloom hasn't been seen in over 1,000 years, he said. "It appears only when hearts are bound without lies." He looked at Jack, then at Zira. "You made a vow, even as a joke," he continued, "and the flower has accepted it." Zira's face turned pale, but she didn't step back. Her eyes stayed locked on Jack, and something unreadable moved behind them. a choice, a question, a fear. She opened her mouth to speak, but stopped herself. Then she turned, without a word, and walked away, her steps quick, her hands trembling. The crowd parted for her, silent and stunned. Jack stood alone, the flowers still glowing in his hands, but now heavier than ever. He didn't chase her, didn't speak, he just watched her go, knowing that the next step wasn't his to take. Somewhere deep inside the colony, Zira shut her door and leaned against it, breathing hard. She had laughed at him, mocked him, tested him, and now she couldn't stop thinking about his eyes, his hands, the way he had come back when no one else would have. She whispered to the empty room, "What did you do to me, human?" But the answer was already blooming in her heart, just like the flower, and it was only the beginning. The crimson soul bloom sat in a glass case now, inside the high chamber of the colony's central dome. Guards stood outside, scientists inside whispered carefully, and every visitor kept their distance as if the flower could hear their thoughts. But it didn't glow for them. It stayed still, quiet, dim. Zira stood alone before it, her hand pressed gently to the glass. Her eyes were fixed on the petals. But her mind wasn't in the room. She was remembering the moment she touched it, the warmth that spread through her chest, the flash of Jack's smile, the thud of something she never wanted to feel. Hope. Behind her, footsteps echoed. Slow and familiar, Jack entered, wearing clean clothes now, but his hands were still bandaged, and his eyes looked older than before. Zira didn't turn, but she felt his presence like heat in a cold room. "They say it's just a flower," she said softly. "But it isn't, is it?" Jack walked closer, his voice low. "No, it changed me," she whispered, "and it's still changing me." Jack stood beside her now, shoulder to shoulder, not touching, but close enough to feel her breath. "I think," he said, "only blooms for those who are ready to see the truth." Zira looked at him, her gaze sharp but unsure. "What truth?" Jack paused, then answered, "That some things grow where no logic can explain, where no map leads." Zira exhaled slowly, her hand leaving the glass. "You're not like the others," she said. "You don't care about power or status or even rewards." "I only cared about one thing," Jack replied, proving that something impossible was worth believing in. The room fell quiet again, but not empty. There was a weight between them now, like a seed pressing against the surface of soil, ready to rise. Later that evening, Zira walked into her family's high hall, where ancient records were kept behind locked doors. She used her private code to access the vault, and from the dust-covered shelf, she pulled an old crystal file with the symbol of the soul bloom etched into it. Her ancestors had studied the flower once long ago, before the wars, before peace. When power ruled and truth was hidden, she activated the file, and a glowing figure appeared in front of her, a Zalari woman from hundreds of years ago, speaking in a soft voice. "The crimson soul bloom is not just a plant," the voice said. "It is a memory of balance, a keeper of promises, a test of hearts." Zira leaned closer, breath held. "It was once used to choose leaders, to prove unions, to bind souls without lies." The figure continued, "It only blooms when two spirits align, not in status, but in intent." The image flickered, then faded. Zira stood still, her chest tight. If the flower had chosen Jack, it had also chosen her back in his small living space. Jack stared out the window at the stars. He didn't sleep, couldn't. He thought about leaving, walking away now that the joke had become something serious. But something rooted him here. It wasn't fame or honor or pride. It was her. The next morning, the council summoned them both to the Great Hall. Zira entered first, wearing traditional silver robes, her face calm but unreadable. Jack followed, still in simple clothes, the red glow from his bandaged hand visible through his sleeve. The council stood in a circle around the flower, which now pulsed with soft red light again. One elder stepped forward, holding a sealed book that had not been opened in generations. "The soul bloom has spoken," the elder said. "By ancient law, The bond has been formed. Zyra's lips parted slightly, her eyes narrowing. You mean marriage? It is more than a ritual, the elder replied. It is a vow written in life itself, guided by the flower's choosing. Zyra turned to Jack, her voice low. Do you even know what this means? Jack looked at her with calm eyes. Do you? Neither of them spoke for a moment, until Zyra stepped forward and placed her hand back on the glass. The flower responded instantly, its petals glowing brighter, the red light wrapping around her wrist like a ribbon of warmth. Jack followed. Placing his hand next to hers, the glass between them disappeared without sound. Like it had never been there, the flower hovered upward, drifting above their heads, then slowly broke into a cloud of petals that rained down over them, each one touched. Skin, hair, breath, and vanished. When it was done, the glow faded and the air felt still, but something between them had changed. The council bowed, accepting the bond. Zyra stepped back, face pale but steady, her voice a whisper. You were never supposed to matter. Jack smiled gently. And yet here I am. She didn't answer, but this time she didn't walk away. The flower was gone now, but the truth it left behind still bloomed. Not in soil, not in stone, but in something far more fragile. Two hearts that never meant to meet, but had and the universe had chosen to let them grow, together. Rain fell gently over the colony, not heavy or cold, but soft like the world was exhaling after holding its breath too long. Zyra stood beneath a wide leaf on the edge of the garden, her hands tucked behind her back, watching tiny red sprouts grow from the soil. They weren't soul blooms, not yet, but they had come from the same valley where Jack found the one that changed everything. People came every day now, not just to see her or him, but to witness what many called the blooming of peace. But to Zyra, it wasn't about peace or politics, it was about a joke. A foolish challenge tossed into the air like it meant nothing, and a human who caught it like it meant everything. Behind her, quiet footsteps stopped. She didn't need to turn. She already knew who it was. Jack stepped beside her. Holding an umbrella he didn't bother to open, letting the rain soak his hair and shoulders. Zyra glanced at him from the corner of her eye. They're growing faster than expected, she said, nodding at the sprouts. Jack gave a small smile. Maybe they know they're wanted this time. A silence stretched between them. Not awkward, just full of thoughts left unsaid. I never expected any of this, she finally said. I only meant to tease you. Jack tilted his head. And yet you changed my life. She looked away, her voice softer now. And you changed mine. The official ceremony had been held 2 nights ago, in front of the council and a crowd that filled the plaza. Zyra had worn a robe of silver and red, the old symbols of her house stitched into the fabric. Jack had worn plain clothes, with the seed of the soul bloom hanging from his neck in a glass pendant. They didn't make grand speeches, didn't kiss for show or promise forever. They only stood together beneath the final petal of the ancient flower. And when it floated down and touched them both, the colony cheered. But afterward, they returned to silence, to thought, to wondering what it really meant. Zyra pulled a red petal from her pocket, dried and perfectly shaped, and handed it to Jack. This was the one that landed in my hand that night, she said. I kept it. Jack took it gently, holding it between his fingers like something sacred. What happens next? He asked, his voice quiet but steady. Zyra looked out at the garden again. We grow something new. It wasn't a vow, not a plan, just truth. No one had expected them to become anything, not even themselves, but the flower had seen something. Neither of them had, and it didn't need explanations. Later that evening, a message arrived from the outer colonies, an invitation to visit, to teach, to bring the story of the soul bloom to worlds that had forgotten how to hope. Zyra sat with the message in her hands and looked across the room at Jack, who was sketching a new plant hybrid with colored pencils. I've been asked to travel, she said. Jack looked up, eyes calm. And? I don't want to go alone, she replied, not smiling, just waiting. Jack nodded once. Then I'll come. The rain stopped by morning, and the stars returned. Before they left, Jack returned to the valley one last time. He knelt on the floating stone where the soul bloom once grew and buried a new seed in the same place. It wasn't magic, just memory. He stood up and whispered, "Thank you." Zira stood behind him, watching silently. As they walked away, the seed cracked open, unnoticed, and a small red light pulsed beneath the soil. The valley wasn't finished, and neither were they. Back aboard the small ship, Zira leaned against the window and stared at the stars moving past. Jack sat beside her, tired but peaceful. "I still can't believe it all started with a joke," she said, shaking her head. Jack leaned back, eyes closing slowly. Sometimes the heart hears what the mouth doesn't mean. She looked at him, this strange, soft-spoken human who had done the impossible, and without a word, she reached out and took his hand, not for show, not for duty, but because it felt right. The soul bloom was gone now, but its echo lived in every step they took, not in legend, but in truth. And that was stronger than any story ever told. Even a joke, when taken seriously, can become a path. And when walked with courage, it can lead to something rare, something red, something real, something worth blooming for together.